But first, please subscribe to the channel, click on the like button, click the bell icon to get notified, and support me on Patreon if you can. There's a link in the description below. Long time no see. Around about July, I was getting very close to being able to put in the H4 asynchronous versions of various libraries that are planned to fix, or at least work around, some notorious long-standing issues with stability of apps on ASP platforms. To be honest, there's not a massive amount changed code-wise since then, but what has changed is that I have had, let's say, fairly severe health issues, which necessitated me spending some time in hospital, and also necessitate me making major changes to my lifestyle, which means that I am not able to devote as much time as I would like to my sideline project of making the IoT world a better place. So that's why there's been a long silence. I'm not going to apologise for it. I couldn't help it. But now that I am kind of on the mend, I'm back in the saddle and ready to start moving forwards where I was in July. Now, a lot of things are going to change. The functionality of everything is going to stay fairly much the same, but a lot of names are going to change and a lot of threads are going to get pulled together. So what we're going to have now is that all of the libraries in the H4 family are going to start with H4. Most of them are going to be prefixed with async because they're based on the async library that lies at the heart of them, and they are built into a much simpler dependency tree because pretty much it's a straight line. And so I've invented this new concept, apart from the fact it's not new. If you've studied psychology or know anything about Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, I've invented the IoT hierarchy of needs, and each one of the layers maps to an H4 async library. Major change from a user point of view is that all of the H4 libraries, including H4 itself, are changed in terms of license to use the Creative Commons license, which is non-commercial share alike. So you can do what you want with it at home for your own personal use, but it expressly prohibits commercial use. If you want to use this stuff commercially, once it's all settled, then contact me and we can talk about how that might happen. But it is for home and personal use only. So today I'm in a position to release H4, which hasn't changed at all apart from the license and a couple of minor silly things just because of the name changing. H4 tools, which used to be PMB tools, and H4 Async TCP. Now, there's not really much you can do with that on its own. I'm going to look at how it works in a minute. And also, I've kind of released an alpha version of the new H4 installer. All of those libraries I mentioned so far don't require anything special and can all be installed manually. They don't really need it. But once we get to the next three sets of libraries above the waterline, the ones that you do use a lot, each of them's got special features that will need the installer to run them, at which point it will install everything else underneath. So it's a simple one-line install. The good news is that the web server, H4 Async web server, I have added in the WebSockets due to popular demand, and we get some very fast WebSocket action going, which I'll give you a sneak preview of later. But as I say, because of the situation I'm now in, don't expect any of this stuff to be happening tomorrow. Right, very briefly then, let's look at H4 Async TCP. Now, if you look back to the news in July, or you've been following this channel for any length of time, you'll know that there's a number of problems with the async libraries. And this is what this whole protocol stack, the hierarchy of needs, is designed to prevent problems with. So at the bottom, the very bottom layer, we've got H4 and H4 tools. And they provide multitasking needs for everything else. So above that, we've got the asynchronous networking, and hopefully that knocks out all the bugs, the known bugs that cause problems that you're probably familiar with and shouldn't have to be. So then on top of that, we've got the async MQTT, which is taken over from what used to be Pangolin, and also HTTP, but that's for doing remote gets from various sites. That's going to be left to last. And then probably the most visible aspect of this, the async web server, which again removes a lot of the problems that have been caused, because a lot of the problems were caused by ESP async TCP, which doesn't exist anymore. So that not only gets round most of the stability problems that used to exist, but also fixes both server sent events and web sockets. At the top, H4 plugins, same as before, it's just you're going to use all H4 async libraries. Nobody else's libraries are going to be touched, and therefore anything that goes wrong is going to be my fault, which means that I'm going to be the one who's going to be there to fix it, unlike some of the other libraries that may be available today. However, moving on, let's have a sneak preview. Well, it's not a sneak preview, I'm publishing Async TCP. So H4 Async TCP, as I say, you can't do much with it on its own unless you're already an expert. But it's the fundamental basis for all of those other libraries. However, what I have done is provided an example code which you can just flick a switch to compile for H4 async or ESP async web server, the thing it's replacing. So here's example run of the comparison code, and what that code does basically is send one packet, which is the same size as the maximum buffer size. It then sends two packets. If that first thing works, it then sends two packets that size. It then sends a packet which is bigger than the whole of what's called the window, and then it sends in rapid succession 20 small packets that will fill that buffer. Now those tests have been designed deliberately to break ESP async web server because it fails on all of them except the first. So you might say, well, what's the purpose of that? Well, the purpose of that is because H4 async doesn't fail on any of them, because it should, ESP async web server should do all of those things. There's no reason why it shouldn't be able to do any of those things, proof being that H4 async can and does do them. So there you go. Look, if you try and send two packets one after the other in rapid succession, it just throws the second one away. If you try and send a packet bigger than the window, it just throws anything away. And if you try and send them too fast, it just throws data away. So those are the major problems in using async. There's fairly common scenarios where it just does not work and it will throw data away without warning you or telling you. All of those things are fixed in H4 version of the library, the H4 async, as you can see. And also, as you can see, it's of the same order of magnitude of speed. So you don't lose anything by having a proper working library doing extra stuff to make sure it doesn't break. That doesn't cause a performance penalty. So now moving up to ESP32, same again. not quite as bad on the ESP32 front. Only tests 2 and 3 fail. Now, the reason tests 2 and 3 fail are for the same reason as they do in the ESP8266. It's because there's no buffer management in those libraries, which is kind of shocking, to be honest. But the difference with the ESP32 is that the high-speed test passes. And the reason it does is because it hasn't got the same bug in it that ESP Async Tcp library has, which is what I call in the overlap bug, where basically if you send stuff too fast, it just gets its knickers in the twist and can't deal with it at all. Similarly, though, on the 32 front with H4 Async TCP, here you go, one library for both platforms, unlike the old versions where you need 2 different libraries. It gets confusing. That does everything, I won't say perfectly, but it doesn't fail. Okay, little sneak preview now, just for fun. Here we've got the async web server running. It's very alpha. It's very alpha. Don't get too excited. But the main thing is that it's updating the millis twice a second. The heap every time it changes, which can be up to twice a second, and the maximum block size, and it's flashing that LED twice a second. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 8 updates per second as an absolute minimum, and also it's updating the NRC. Yeah, these are the 2 things which aren't being used at the moment. So basically, there's 10 updates per second using WebSockets, which, if you know about the other version of the library, you'll be very happy to hear that you can do that now, because the other version of the library can't. But also, there's all part of H4 Async as well, although you can't see it unless you use the web server. It can run multiple servers at once. We're running the normal web server on 80. We're running an echo server on 8080, which just bounces back anything that's sent to it. And we're running a random quote server on 8888, which every time you send it a request, it just gives you a different message. So that's telling you to support me on Patreon. I don't know what the next one is. Oh yeah, right, there you go. And each time you do that, you get a piece of homespun wisdom, etc., etc., just to show that you can do it, to be honest. And just out of interest, looking at those, this is all part of the H4 Async, which is released today. It's got the server part of it built in, the abstract server, which doesn't take much at all to add to it. So here, for example, here's the total code for that quote server. That's all it is. You just instantiate a web server class, because basically it needs to do some fancy formatting, right? But if you want a raw server, such as like an echo server, that's all the code you need. So you've got an abstract base class of a server. You've got a thing in here called root, and what this root does is it does nothing really apart from transmit any data that it receives. So it just bounces back as an echo server would and should. So if you remove that, you then get a discard server, which basically takes in anything and basically does nothing with it and throws it away. So it's very, very simple to add your own different types of server. And the H4 Async web server is just one of those abstract servers with the HTTP protocol built on the top of it. Well, I've been talking long enough. Summary is H4 Async out today. Soon you'll get H4 Async MQTT. Then you'll get web server once it's all finished and tested. And then you'll get the new version 4 of H4 plugins, which will use exclusively H4 code all the way down the stack, and that'll be moved up to version 4. and from that point onwards we should have less dependency on other people's libraries, which cause well-known instabilities. Okay, hope you found that exciting, and I look forward to getting some more libraries out soon. Thanks for listening. As always, thanks for watching. Please remember to subscribe, like, click the notification button, and support me on Patreon if you can. Thanks, and see you next time.